My father pushed the bill across the polished table. "She's good with the small numbers," he told the waiter, winking as my family chuckled. The sound echoed his words from moments before. "You'll never be as good as your brother." For years, I'd been their safety net, their silent investor, the daughter they could always count on. But looking at their smiling, entitled faces, I realized they didn't see a person. They saw an asset, and that asset was about to be liquidated. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. My name is Rose, and for most of my 38 years, I believed that responsibility was a form of love. I thought that being the anchor, the one who quietly fixed things, was my purpose in the chaotic sea of my family. This role wasn't assigned to me on a specific day. It was a slow erosion of boundaries that began when I was 21. My father had lost his job, and for 6 months, my meager salary from my first real job kept our family home out of foreclosure. I remember the look of relief on my mother's face and the rare, solid pat on the back from my father. "You saved us, Rosie," he'd said. That praise became a drug, and I spent the next 17 years chasing that feeling, proving I was the reliable one, the savior. I learned far too late that to them, an anchor isn't a savior. It's just a weight designed to keep their ship steady while they enjoy the view. My revelation didn't come in a sudden flash of lightning, but in the cold, quiet glow of a computer screen on a Tuesday morning. It began with an email from my bank, the subject line a polite but firm, "Credit card limit warning." My heart did a familiar, tired plummet. I opened it to see the statement for the card I co-signed for my brother, Liam, a card he was supposed to use only for startup emergencies. But the list of charges told a different story. A subscription to a masterclass on disruptive marketing, a series of expensive lunches at downtown bistros I couldn't afford, and a brand new drone listed under equipment testing. It was the story of a lifestyle I was funding, a performance of success staged with my money. I could almost hear his voice, full of that casual charm that always worked on our parents. "You have to spend money to make money. Rose." Before I could even process the fresh wave of resentment, my phone rang. The caller ID showed it was my mother. "Helen." I braced myself. Her calls were rarely just to chat. They were soft-spoken missions of emotional reconnaissance. "Hi, honey," she began, her voice a little shaky. "I don't mean to bother you. You're just so busy these days. It's just my knee is acting up again. And the doctor mentioned a new kind of injection. But the insurance is being difficult." She sighed, a sound perfected over decades to convey maximum weariness. "I know you're good with those things. I just don't have the energy to fight with them." She didn't have to say the rest. The implication was clear. My energy was a resource she was entitled to. I promised to handle it. My own work on a grant proposal for a women's shelter momentarily forgotten. Not 10 minutes later, as I was navigating the automated menu of the insurance company, my other line buzzed. It was Liam. "Hey, quick question," he started. No hello. "My presentation deck for the investors needs a final proofread. It's only like 40 slides. You're good at making things sound professional. Can you get it back to me in an hour?" The request, layered on top of everything else, was so audacious it was almost comical. I was managing his debt and our mother's health, and he was asking me to edit his homework. I told him I was busy, and his voice turned cold. "Fine, just thought you'd want to be a team player. This is for the whole family, you know." The call ended, leaving me feeling both guilty and furious. Then, the final call of the morning came. It was my father, Richard. His tone was breezy, a stark contrast to my mother's manufactured fragility. He launched directly into a monologue about a once-in-a-lifetime investment opportunity Liam had found, and how he had unfortunately used the money from his and my mother's retirement fund to get in on it. He needed me to cover their contribution for the next 6 months. It wasn't a question. "Liam says this is going to be huge," he said, his voice booming with unearned confidence. "It's important we all support his vision." I stood in my small home office, the silence stretching between us. My eyes were fixed on a rejection letter from a mortgage lender for a modest condo I had been trying to buy for myself for over a year. The reason was stated in cold, black ink: debt-to-income ratio too high. The irony was a physical ache in my chest. I was too broke from carrying the weight of my family's finances to be approved for a home of my own. And here was my father, asking me to take on more without a hint of shame. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in a while. I opened a folder on my computer, one I had simply labeled Family. Inside was a single spreadsheet I had started creating months ago, not out of anger, but out of a desperate need to see the truth in black and white, to give a name to the invisible weight on my shoulders. I added the new credit card charges, the retirement fund amount, and a new line item: unbilled consulting hours. I stared at it, the numbers blurring. As I sat there, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother, Helen. "Darling, don't forget the big celebration dinner for Liam tonight. Your Aunt Carol is coming too. Try to look happy for your brother. Please don't bring that stressed face to the table." The message was so tone-deaf, so completely oblivious to the reality of the situation, that I almost laughed. They weren't just taking my money, they were now curating my emotions, demanding I perform happiness at the scene of my own financial ruin. Driving to the restaurant that evening, the rain on my windshield blurred the city lights into long, sorrowful streaks. My car, a sensible sedan now 10 years old, felt worlds away from the lifestyle my money was funding for Liam. A call from my best friend, Sarah, interrupted the quiet hum of the engine. She asked about the condo, her voice full of excitement for me. I had to force the words out, a lie that tasted like ash. "I'm still considering my options." The lie was for their protection, not mine, a habit I couldn't seem to break. The shame of that lie was so acute that I had to pull over to the side of the road. I sat there in the dark, the rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers the only sound. Why was I protecting them? Why was I hiding the truth that their irresponsibility was drowning me? On a sudden, desperate impulse, I opened my phone, found the spreadsheet in my family folder, and emailed it to myself. I didn't know why. It felt like arming myself for a battle I didn't even know I was about to fight. Just as I was about to put the car back in drive, a notification lit up my screen. It was from Instagram. Liam had just posted a photo of himself, grinning smugly from a plush booth inside the very restaurant I was driving to. The caption read, "Ready for the big celebration dinner. All thanks to my amazing sister and #1 investor. She's always believed in my vision." He had tagged my name. He was using my sacrifice as a prop in the theater of his success. And I felt a cold, hard knot form in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't family. This was a transaction. And I was the only one paying. When I walked into the restaurant, the air was thick with forced festivity. My family and my Aunt Carol were already seated. A bottle of expensive champagne, which I knew I would be paying for, sat chilling on the table. The conversation revolved entirely around Liam. He spoke in a flurry of buzzwords: synergy, scalability, disrupting the market, painting a picture of a future empire. I found myself mentally deconstructing his speech, translating his jargon into the stark reality of my spreadsheet. Seed funding meant the loan I co-signed. Product development meant the drone on my credit card. My father nodded along sagely, as if he understood every word, while my mother watched Liam with an expression of pure adoration. I sat through the appetizer, the main course, and the gushing praise. My Aunt Carol reached across the table and patted my hand. "It's just wonderful, Rose, how you've dedicated yourself to being such a wonderful support for your brother. Some people build the empires, and some people manage the books. Both are important," she said. her smile not quite reaching her eyes. It wasn't a compliment. It was a coronation of my permanent secondary role. The final act came when the waiter brought the check. He naturally placed it in the middle of the table. But my father, without missing a beat in his conversation with Liam, picked it up and slid it smoothly across the table directly in front of me. He glanced at the waiter and winked. "She handles this," he said with a chuckle. "She's good with the small numbers." That was it, the public declaration of my role. Not a daughter, not a sister, just the family accountant, the one who handles the small numbers so the men could dream big. In that moment, as my family's laughter washed over me, a profound and terrifying calm settled in my soul. Richard leaned back in his chair, smiling at me. "What's the matter, cat got your tongue?" he joked. Then he delivered the final, killing blow, the words that would change everything. He chuckled, looking at Liam with adoration before his eyes flickered back to me. "Don't worry, honey. You'll never be as good as your brother, but we love you anyway." I slowly placed my water glass back on the table, the small click echoing in the sudden silence inside my head. I stood up. My chair scraped against the floor, the sound sharp and alien in the warm, buzzing restaurant. Every eye at the table turned to me, their smiles frozen, their expressions confused. I pulled out my phone, my movements deliberate, my hands perfectly steady. I opened the email I had sent to myself in the car, the screen glowing with the stark, undeniable truth of my spreadsheet. The final number at the bottom seemed to pulse with a light of its own, $287,450. "What are you doing, Rose? Sit down!" My father hissed, his good humor vanishing. But I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at Liam, whose smug grin had finally faltered. "Then tell him to pay it," I said, my voice not loud, but so clear and cold that it cut through the entire table's chatter. I turned my phone screen towards them, my finger pointing to the total. "Tell him to pay back the $287,450 that I have spent supporting this family for the last 10 years. Tell him to take over the mortgage on your house that's in my name. Tell him to start funding your retirement account. And tell him—" I finished, my eyes landing on the bill in front of my plate. "To pay for his own damn dinner." I reached into my wallet, pulled out the credit card that had financed so much of their lives, and laid it on the table. Then I took the small pair of scissors from my keychain, and with a single satisfying snip, I cut the card in half. The two pieces of plastic fell onto the white tablecloth. I turned and walked away, leaving them all sitting in a stunned, perfect silence, the bill for their lives finally, irrevocably, on their own table. The walk to my car felt like floating. I didn't feel angry or sad. I felt nothing. A vast, quiet emptiness where years of anxiety and resentment used to live, before I even reached my car. My phone began to buzz. I ignored it. By the time I was driving home, it was a relentless storm of notifications. I didn't look at a single one. I just drove. That night, I slept for 8 uninterrupted hours. The next morning, I woke up to a digital siege as I blocked their numbers, but the attack simply changed tactics. Voicemails appeared. My mother's tearful voice accusing me of abandoning her in her time of need. Emails from new accounts filled my inbox. My father's words shifting from rage to threats about how I owed them respect. Aunt Carol texted me a long paragraph about how I was tearing the family apart over a little bit of money, and how a good daughter would never embarrass her parents like that. I didn't reply. My first call was to a lawyer, a woman named Miss Albright, whose demeanor was as no-nonsense as her tailored suit. I explained everything, my voice clinical as I detailed the joint mortgages and co-sign loans. When I finished, she looked at me over her glasses. "Rose," she asked, her voice gentle but firm, "why did you allow this to continue for so long?" The question hung in the air. "Because I thought it was my job to keep everyone happy," I whispered, the admission tasting like defeat. "I thought that's what love was." Miss Albright nodded slowly. "Love is not an invoice," She said, "Let's get to work." Those words became my mantra. It took months of paperwork and tense negotiations. But one by one, I severed every financial tie during that time. The first Thanksgiving arrived. The silence in my small apartment was deafening. I felt a sharp pang of loneliness, a deeply ingrained guilt that whispered I should be with my family. I actually picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over my mother's unblocked email address. But then I looked around my own space, a place of peace. And I remembered Miss Albright's words. I put the phone down and made myself a simple dinner. It wasn't a feast, but it was honest, and it was mine. With my name cleared, the bank approved my condo loan in less than a week. My best friend Sarah came over the day I got the keys. We sat on the floor of the empty living room with a bottle of cheap champagne. "To Rose," she said, raising her plastic cup. "Not the support system, not the investor, just Rose." Tears streamed down my face. But for the first time, they weren't tears of frustration. They were tears of relief. My therapist later told me, "You were never just their anchor, Rose. You were their anchor, their sail, their rudder, and the entire crew. You were exhausted from trying to be the whole ship." The first of the month came, the day I used to automatically send money to my father. I opened my banking app, and instead of sending it to him, I created a recurring transfer into my own investment account. It felt like a quiet declaration of independence. A year passed. My life found a new rhythm. I poured the energy I once spent on my family's crises into my career, and I thrived. My nonprofit work flourished. I took a trip to a rural community in the mountains where a grant I had written had funded a new library. Seeing the children pulling books from the shelves, their faces alight with curiosity, I felt a sense of purpose so profound it almost brought me to my knees. This was where my energy belonged. This was a return on investment that actually mattered. One evening, while preparing for a video conference with a team in Geneva, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was just my name. My heart gave a small reflexive jolt, but it was just curiosity. I opened it. It was from Liam. The tone was completely different. It was desperate. "Can you send me $500, he wrote. "Just this one time, I promise I'll pay you back. Mom and Dad are really struggling." I read the email twice. I thought about the years of sacrifice, the humiliation, the final, clean break. I thought about the man he was and the woman I had become. I felt a flicker of something, but it wasn't pity. It was closure. Without a moment's hesitation, I moved the email into the family folder on my computer, not to save, but to file away with the rest of the past. Then, I dragged the entire folder into the trash and emptied it. I stood up, walked to the balcony of my condo, and looked out at the city lights. The air was cool and clean, and for the first time, I felt truly, completely free. In the quiet architecture of our lives, we are sometimes assigned a role without ever auditioning for it: the pillar, the anchor, the endless well from which others draw. We learn to confuse obligation with affection and silence with peace. But true value is not measured by how much we can carry for others, but by the courage it takes to finally set that weight down. It's in the profound silence that follows that we can finally hear our own voice and reinvest our energy not into fixing what is broken, but into building something that is truly our own. This story is a reminder that the most important boundaries are often the ones we must draw for ourselves. We would love to hear which moment in this journey of self-reclamation resonated with you the most. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective is what makes this community so special. If this story moved you, please consider liking and subscribing for more narratives of strength and transformation. Thank you for watching.